So astonishingly now, remember that what state training can do, and if you look at any of the generalized maps that the great contemplative traditions have left, whether it's the Evelyn Underhill summarized them as good as any, Daniel P. Brown, as many of you know, did an extraordinary comparison using something like 13 or 14 root texts of the Mahamudra tradition, then compared those with other traditions, including Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, including certain Chinese texts, and then we did a final comparison with some of the Christian texts with Harvard theologian John Churbain, and we included his map taken from the early Desert Fathers. Well, all they're really saying is that consciousness, wakefulness, starts out confined in what's called the waking state. And the traditions generally maintain you have a waking state, a dream state, a deep, dreamless state, a witness of all of those is ever present, and the witness itself is without qualities, unqualifiable consciousness as such, pure emptiness. And then the final, not final, but the highest of this in the general states is the non-dual, where that empty witness, which generally just stands back and witnesses what is arising, suddenly snaps and disappears. And there's only everything that is arising, and everything that's arising is self-cognizing, self-aware. And those 5 main stages, and they are state stages, are fundamental paths in the contemplative traditions around the world. Now, of course, the surface structures vary enormously. But what's happening when you do this, with structural development, you're increasing the number of perspectives you can take. That's basically what it is. It's fundamentally that simple. With states of consciousness, you are going through realms of reality that you're going to disidentify with and finally get off of manifestation entirely. And that's the fundamental aim of meditation, is to see through all of manifestation, to see through the dream itself, and awaken to your ever-present condition. Ever-present big mind, ever-present primordial awareness. And in both of these, both states and structures, you have a self-sense, a separate self, whose main function is identification, identity. It identifies with these. And so both in vertical growth, what happens is the self first identifies with, well, we can use the chakras as examples of structures. They're, again, not as precise as some of the Western models, but it works well and people understand it. But the first year or so, you're identified with the first chakra, and you have oral drives, the whole orientation is the physical, material world. And then you move into the emotional, sexual range. That particularly starts from 3 to 5. Then you start to develop an intentional mind and power, of course, the third chakra. Then you move into, these are all me, or egocentric. Then when you move into the fourth chakra, or ethnocentric, you begin to be able to love. So that's in a positive sense, because you're moving up from me to we. You move into the fifth chakra of creative self-expression, and that has several different varieties to it, but includes both orange and green, for example. You move into the sixth chakra, and that's essentially integrative thinking that starts to become luminous, and that's the second tier, essentially. And then the seventh chakra, which is sort of stands for all of third tier, transpersonal development. Now, that's a structural development. And as you do that, every time you go up a structure, you're increasing the amount of perspectives you can hold. That's a fundamental aspect of what we would call vertical enlightenment. But at any one of those stages, you can turn right and get off the entire scale. You can be at amber or orange or green, and at any one of those you can undertake state training. Because what you're doing is, in structural development, you are stripping your identity with these lower chakras and increasingly identifying with higher chakras, higher structures of perspectives. And in state training, you're doing the same thing. You're going from an identity that's mostly material-oriented, outward world-oriented, ego-oriented, into a subtle dimension of luminosity and interior archetypes and interior vision. And then your identity goes from there, if you continue doing it, it goes into causal, unmanifest absorption. And from there into an awakening to ever-present witness or big mind. And then from there to a realization of the non-dual suchness of big mind, big heart. And that turning right can occur at almost any altitude. These are two independent variables. And part of the problem has been that particularly Buddhism, because Buddhism is a very, very smart religion, and so it's been kind of the religion of the intelligentsia, a small number of the intelligentsia. When it turns to religion, it basically turns to Zen, and then increasingly now into Tibetan as well. And what happened is that a large number of these intelligentsia were at a green altitude. And as they went through their state training, many of them became transmitted masters at green altitude. And in Japan, many of them are transmitted masters at an amber altitude, or blue. Now, this really isn't a judgment. It's just a statement about where people are in terms of overall growth and development. Thanks. So what we want to do is sort of keep both of those in mind, because this is a growth sequence, two types of growth sequence that up to this point nobody had seen. First of all, that they both existed. It was one or the other. And second of all, how both of them need to go together and need to basically be mastered, in the sense of that wakefulness, capital W, doesn't just go through vertical structures of increasing perspectives. It goes through horizontal states of increasing disidentification. And the net result is basically a freedom and a fullness in ways that historically have just not simply been realized. So let me stop with that. I didn't plan on giving quite this sort of yak thing at the beginning, but I was getting into these two different scales, and I wanted to sort of give you a little bit of a take on it, because we want to, all of you kind of on occasion can reach in to your own overmind or even supermind, because all of you are here at least turquoise cognitively, or you, well, wouldn't be here. So these vertical structures are within reach, and all of you, of course, have these ever-present states available and are working on awakening them. So it's one of the extraordinary things that we can do here is really try to reach into our own highest and deepest capacities and do so with a sense of responsibility. Because believe me, nobody likes being at the forefront of anything. I promise you, I don't. What you get when you're at the forefront is nothing but carpet burn. And everybody's heard my favorite politically incorrect definition of a pioneer, which is the guy with all the arrows in his back. And that's exactly what you're going to get from doing this. I don't have any illusions about that. This practice carries its own responsibilities and its own difficulties. And that any time you push against the consciousness of the center of gravity of the culture in which you're in, that pushing gives you what I call carpet burns. It gives you an actual physical, in your gross body for sure, sometimes in your subtle and causal bodies. It's just you're being drug across the floor by your feet naked. And, well, I like the naked part, but the dragging across the rug part, it can really be difficult. So don't have any illusions about this. On the other hand, once you see the evidence and see that these are potentials that you have, then if you have any interest in enlightenment at all, you must have interest in enlightening both of these streams, because they're both there. Down one path is supermind, down the other path, big mind. Big mind, big heart, supermind, super heart. But that's what we're talking about.